Hey friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name is Bianca, and today I am going to start a new mini reading club series called Dead Readers Society. Well, I'm not exactly the best with names, but Dead Poet Society was an excellent movie. And if you haven't actually watched it, please do, treat yourself. Why am I doing this? Essentially, well-written books typically pass down years of wisdom and thoughts shared by people who have seen quite a fair bit of life. And arguably, we are in a pretty privileged position to be able to access that in exchange for, well, a few bucks. So to me, investing time to just read and read is actually something that feels almost like a steal. And the first book I'd like to talk about today is one that I just so happened to stumble upon on LinkedIn. Jamie Lim, another fellow YouTuber whose content you probably should also consider checking out, was basically sharing about a book that she's planning to read as part of developing her emotional intelligence, or EQ. And that book is called 12 and a Half, written by a guy called Gary V. In case you're not familiar, Gary V is one of those serial entrepreneurs who's pretty active on social media. Okay, not meaning to throw any shade, but if you happen to ever come across this aggressive dude who's spreading seemingly strong opinions about positivity or hustling for your dreams on places like Instagram or LinkedIn, chances are it is probably him, right? As much as how the internet has presented polarizing views on him, even I actually personally got really intimidated by his intense level of enthusiasm. I would still have to say that he does have quite a number of good points to say with regards to how to live a happier and more fulfilling life. And to be fair, he's a pretty successful and influential entrepreneur himself, so I'm pretty sure that he has definitely done some things right. Plus, my soft skills are a constant work in progress, and my job basically requires me to interact and manage people on almost a day-to-day basis. With that, I decided to just, pick up the book, have a read, and just see what he has to say. So, what is 12 and a Half all about? Basically, 12 and a Half represents the 13 emotional ingredients that Gary strongly believes everyone needs to acquire during their lifetime. And just like how the book title suggests, leveraging the emotional ingredients necessary for business success, Gary argues that mastering these 13 emotional ingredients are fundamentally a non-negotiable if you ever want to succeed as an entrepreneur. So you could technically say that Gary was approaching this topic from a management or business book standpoint as opposed to a self-help one. And with that, the 13 emotional ingredients that Gary identified in his book are namely gratitude, the quality of being thankful, the readiness to show appreciation for and to return kindness, self-awareness, the conscious knowledge of one's own character, feelings, motives, and desires, accountability, the fact or condition of being accountable, or to basically demonstrate a sense of responsibility, optimism, the hopefulness and confidence about the future or the successful outcome of something, empathy, the ability to understand and share the feelings of another, kindness, the quality of being friendly, generous, and considerate, tenacity, the quality of fact of being very determined, curiosity, a strong desire to know or learn something, patience, the capacity to accept or tolerate delay, trouble, or suffering without getting angry or upset, conviction, a firmly held belief or opinion, humility, a modest or low view of one's own importance, basically humbleness, ambition, a strong desire to just do or achieve something, typically requiring determination and hard work, and finally, kind candor. That is a lot of emotional ingredients to master. And in this book, Gary defined half to be basically a person's weaknesses, or to just put it in a nicer way, areas of improvement. For instance, if you happen to struggle a lot with optimism, then your half would therefore be optimism. Or let's just say you are someone who has a bad habit of being super impatient, then your half would therefore be patience. And in Gary's case, he identified his half to be kind candor, meaning to say that he personally finds himself struggling to provide feedback in a direct and candid manner. And in this book, Gary essentially broke his sharing down into 3 key sections. In the first one, he basically took the time to define each emotional ingredient and to briefly explain how each of them can actually impact your career and life altogether. This is followed by section 2, where he basically offered suggestions on how you could deploy each emotional ingredient depending on the different real-life scenarios that an entrepreneur could expect to face during their whole business journey. And finally, for the third section, Gary decided to just make things a little more fun for the readers by challenging us to complete some real-life exercises as part of developing each emotional ingredient. And I've got to admit, some of them were borderline uncomfortable. Like, to give you an example, for the self-awareness exercise, Gary basically asked us to fill in a form, like a Google form, as to how you think you would personally react to different situations that may occur in business and in life. And the catch is, you gotta just keep a copy of your answers and send the same form to 10 people who are closest to you, both personally and professionally, and get them to just answer how they think you will respond in those situations. Oh, and the form that they get to answer would be completely anonymized. So when I get responses from, my colleagues or my friends, I would arguably have no idea who wrote that answers. Okay, well, technically it's not too hard to guess. Once it's done, you can then compare your own answers with other people's answers and just try to gauge how self-aware you are, and therefore aim to improve yourself from that. And if you happen to be curious, the results for my survey were rather interesting.
She's a curious cat. Not wrong.
So that's my attempt in giving a brief summary of the book 12 and a half without hopefully giving away too many spoilers. Overall, I would recommend Gary's book and to just practice the things he said in moderation. Although his style of writing and the kind of ideas that he brought forward can be a little repetitive at times, he did have some valuable points. To some degree, I would actually consider 12 and a half to be this toned down version of The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F by Mark Manson, in the sense that Gary's writings occasionally challenges the reader's mindset directly, and depending on who you are and how you interpret his words, he could technically come across as someone who is super blunt. But once you just cast that initial judgment aside, I would have to actually admit that I could sense a lot of passion that Gary was trying to convey through his writing. Or, well, maybe I have stumbled upon too many of his videos on social media, but it's almost as if I could feel or hear him speaking his points out loud as I read his book. So at least from a fellow reader's point of view, I think it is fair for me to say that I do believe that Gary was being really authentic with the points he is trying to make. Nevertheless, 12 and a half is not 100% comprehensive, meaning to say that yes, although I do agree with Gary that mastering these 13 emotional ingredients are vital, there's a lot more to that. At least from my personal experiences and understanding, great entrepreneurs, on top of mastering these 13 emotional ingredients, are also people who are super adventurous, they are resourceful, they're analytical, and they're really good at self-regulation, or discipline in other words. On top of that, some of the best entrepreneurs I have personally come across are also people who have demonstrated an extremely high degree of integrity. They showcased a lot of courage in the face of fear, and they actually demonstrated this next level of selflessness. Regardless, I would still say that the 13 emotional ingredients discussed in this book are still offering a pretty decent baseline for anyone to just develop a sense of direction and start to learn how to approach your life in a much more emotionally matured manner. In other words, Gary's book provided me with a rough guideline to just diagnose on areas I could try to improve more on. For example, some of the emotional ingredients I realized that I still struggle with would be kind candor, just like how Gary himself is personally struggling with. Another area for me would be patience. Perhaps it is just my rather ambitious nature, but I sometimes do catch my tendency to have a really poor relationship with time. So I actually have to give Gary a lot of credit because he did a great job at reminding us to acknowledge the amount of time and life ahead of us, remain grateful of our current opportunities, and to just put in the work necessary for us to move closer to our personal goals whilst remembering to enjoy the journey. And as someone who is just starting out her career, I do actually hold this conviction that the future of business will probably be forced to adopt the similar principles that were discussed in Gary's book. Key reason for that, well, as Gary highlighted in his book, he believed that the growth potential of businesses will be limited by the emotional intelligence of their leaders. With that, Gary just really wanted to remind everyone through his book that working on developing your soft skills as well as emotional intelligence is actually not considered to be a nice to have, but rather a non-negotiable if you ever want to achieve any form of success in your business and in your life. And again, not meaning to throw shade towards anybody, well, I'll just say that the world can definitely benefit from having more emotionally matured leaders. So fair enough, Gary, and thank you for sharing this. Nonetheless, I'm always happy to hear your thoughts about this book in the comment section down below. Maybe you might have a very different interpretation of his writing, or you might have a different point of view that I have not covered in this video. But as mentioned, I'm always curious and happy to learn. With that, thank you so much for taking the time to watch my video. If you enjoyed it, I would really appreciate if you could just hit the like, subscribe and bell icon. And if you're interested, I have actually produced a video series where I talked about the 8 different, life advice I would have shared with my 20-year-old self if time machines ever existed during my lifetime. So do consider checking that out if those kind of topics interest you. Till then, I wish you a pleasant day ahead. Have fun, be kind to yourself, and I shall see you in my next video. Bye!